Welcome back to the Venari Podcast. I'm Gov Kandola, and I'm joined for this episode by Niels van Namen. Niels is the EVP of Global Healthcare at CEVA Logistics and is an expert in the domain of healthcare, life sciences, especially with a focus on supply chain, logistics, and technology. Niels, welcome.
Gov, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be on your podcast today.
We're the ones who are honored to have you on. You're an incredibly busy man. And we've actually got you for a two-part series where we're not only learning more about yourself, gaining an insight into a topic that you're actually very passionate about as well, and that is home healthcare. But to kick us off, what made you want to pursue a career in the supply chain industry? And it's also specifically with a focus on healthcare and life science.
Wow, that's a great question. And as my head kind of explains, I'm in the industry for a bit longer. So about 25 years now in this wonderful healthcare industry. I started off as an engineer,
okay,
but and into different engineering jobs. But I fell in love in a way with, at that time, the pharmaceutical challenges that were there as well. So I started as an entrepreneur and founded a company in clinical trial research. And that was very interesting. That got me into pharma, got me into clinical trials, got me into the different aspects of how to get medicines to patients and how does that supply chain and the value chain work at all. And so I didn't really start in the supply chain. That really came secondary and later on, where I did quite some work in manufacturing areas, in R&D and in supply chain as well. Where at that time, and that was in the early 2000s, also big pharma companies were really investing a lot of money and attention in the R&D phase. And of course, on the commercial side, all that money and investment need to come out, plus also the margin on top of that. There was not too much focus on the manufacturing and supply chain piece in the middle. And after COVID, and probably also we've seen that, Gov, in your earlier podcast, right? Also, since COVID, everyone understands the importance of supply chains. Everyone understands the impact of logistics and the importance of logistics as well. So that's really how my career started and where I fell in love with that complicated ecosystem in a way. The complicated ecosystem of healthcare, which in our definitions at CEVA is really the combined areas of pharmaceutical business, the medical device space, the diagnostics and lab space, but also indeed, that fourth element, what we're going to talk about later, is wherever the patient is. And traditionally, there was very focused on hospitals. And now more and more, the patients are like consumers. They're everywhere. They're at work, they're at home, they're in the hospital, they're at different places. So we see the world change, we see the ecosystem change, we see the channels change, and I find it fascinating to be in it.
It certainly is. And I remember our first conversation actually came discussing talent and the wider industry. You mentioned obviously the exponential growth that is happening, also the investment that's happening within this vertical and these verticals over the past couple of years. Given that pace of change across the pharmaceutical industry, in your opinion, is there enough emerging talent and also the emerging skill sets within those talents within the logistics space to keep up with the demand that we are seeing?
Yeah, the short answer, Gov, is no, never enough. So that's why it's important that we keep advertising and advocating for this, I believe, wonderful area to be in. And I think it's very, very exciting. And also the years to come, it will be more exciting. So it's important that companies like yours and executive search firms and the industry itself really work together with the universities to make sure that the talent is there and is ready for the job, is ready for the challenge. So that is indeed people out of school, people still in school. I'm personally also involved in a couple of universities and talking to those students, and it's really interesting to see how different the next generation thinks and acts. I think it's very, very valuable, and it's really up to us to make sure that we can provide a career, right? Not just a job, but we can provide them a career. I said across that ecosystem of different subsectors and the changing landscape and the changing behaviors of patients, right? The old, let's call it supply chains of having to balance cost and lead time in a single kind of supply chain and channel, that is changing, right? So we're moving away from that into multiple different supply chains and channels next to each other. Right, from big, bulky, fast-moving goods all the way down to markets where the market is only one person with personalized medicines and different immunotherapies that we're seeing. So there's a range of different supply chains happening now with different behaviors, with different expectations, and a much more focus on cost and control, but really on compliance. And so the people in supply chain, I think that's really nice that everything comes together. It converges all into that role of logistics or supply chain professional.
Yeah, it's a rapidly expanding vertical. It's certainly an exciting one and incredibly relevant in the next over the coming years, from cold chain all the way to the wider supply chain industry. So yeah, definitely one to look out for, and especially one for, I would say, emerging talent coming out of universities to certainly think about. Now, for anyone who hasn't seen your TED Talk on why the hospital of the future will be your own home, I would highly recommend watching it. It's a great watch. And it kind of leads on to our next topic, and that is, why is home healthcare the future?
Yeah, and where we just ended, right, on the talent. And again, it's not just limited to the healthcare industry, right? So it happens to be the industry that I'm fond of and I'm excited about, but indeed equally in automotive or in industrial or in consumer retail as well, there's a lot of the same challenges happening at the same time. And that's why I believe it's nice to work for logistics companies that really can tap into the different segments and sectors and industries and leverage the different aspects. But again, back to your question on the TED Talk, right? What I just talked about. So the TED Talk is really, and again, thanks for bringing it up and hinting the folks to see it. But it really came from the fact that in developed as well as in developing economies, which is really close to my heart as well, this is not just a Western world story, that we see the cost of care rise generally decade after decade or year after year as well. And again, I start off with a couple of points that over the last 50 years, it's grown in the US from around 10 to 17% of GDP.
Wow.
And in Europe, we see lower, but we see the same lower numbers, but the same growth. Consuming a larger part of our national domestic product to actually provide care to folks. And again, we can debate, maybe we should have another 10 minutes on that. We can debate if that's an issue, right? So I personally believe it's an issue because it eats out of the common pot of money that we have to spend for not just for healthcare, but also for education, for roads, all the other things. So if we just keep growing the part of healthcare, we at least owe ourselves to really rethink, is there ways where we can do it better, maybe cheaper, or overall at a lower cost against maybe even higher quality. And then the overall story is that we see that a lot of cost go to the chronic care part of care. Very roughly, you can split chronic care from acute care. Right, so there'll still be hospitals for acute care, for surgery, neonatology, for the different parts where you really want to be in a hospital. But again, a large part of that budget actually goes to the chronic care conditions. And again, that's diabetes care, that's renal care, but even also oncology and different parts of urology and those kind of care things, where also research, not just I, but research has shown that there's much better ways to bring that to the patient. And the patient very often is at home. So the logistics channel is changing or can change from the hospital where everything is managed there to the patient's home. I believe there's a lot about convenience as well. So if we can combine a lower cost and more convenience by applying, let's call it logistics themes like density and where we can have the world of care and logistics converge, I believe there's much more we can do in home care and better serving patients and better also monitoring the outcomes for patients in some of these chronic conditions. And so that is indeed what the talk is about.
I'll leave our listeners with a statistic that you mentioned on the TED Talk. 64% of patients in the US avoid healthcare due to the cost, which is staggering. But yeah, that's more for another conversation. And as I said, for all our listeners, do tune into your TED Talk and have a little watch of that. It's brilliant. And in part 2, we're actually getting an insight into the future of pharma logistics. So I'm looking forward to that conversation.